Hello, welcome to Practical C++ Programming, the beginner course. My name is Zach, and in this tutorial we will be discussing for loops. Now in the last tutorial we discussed while loops, and I gotta say for loops are quite different, and you'll see why here in a minute. So the way a for loops works, you're going to go ahead and set it up the same. You're going to say for your condition and then the brackets, just as you would a while loop or an if statement. You just proceed it, before the condition is where you write for. So the confusing part to many people is the condition inside the for loop and how it works. And I'm going to go ahead and explain it to y'all, but first I'm going to set up a variable. We'll call it value, and we'll say equal. Actually, the way we're going to do it is, we'll say value equals 0. Okay, we'll just set value equal to 0. And then here in the for loop, we're going to declare an integer called index, and we're going to set it equal to 0. Okay, and then put a semicolon. Now just stick with me for a second, because I know right now you're thinking, what? That right there, you're declaring something in a condition. Well, this is not the whole condition. This is only 1/3 of the condition. So after you declare your variable int index equals to 0, we're going to say index less than 10, and then we'll say index plus plus. Now I want you to sit here and breathe this in for a second, because I know it looks complicated, especially if this is your first time ever looking at a for loop. So basically what we're doing in this for loop, we're declaring index as a variable and setting it equal to 0, okay? And then we're saying this right here is basically our condition, is what I would call the condition aside from these other two. This middle part says do this while loop as long as index is less than 10. And then this third part is what I like to call the incremental part of the for loop. This is how much you want to increment each time the loop runs the variable that you're testing, index. And I mentioned earlier in the last tutorial, I believe, that minus equals was the same thing as saying index equals index minus 1. Well, in C++, index plus plus is the same thing as saying index equals index plus 1. So easier way to write that is to just say index plus plus. And I know we did, something like index minus equals 1. Well, another way to do that actually in the last tutorial could have just been index minus minus as well. So that's the same thing as saying index minus equals 1, and that's also the same thing as saying index index equals index minus 1. Just as this is the same thing as saying index equals index plus 1. So just keep that in mind. Index plus plus, we're incrementing index by 1 each time the code inside this loop runs. And what I want to do is I want to say cout value indel. And what we'll do is we'll actually add 5 to value each time. So if we run this, you'll see we get 0, 5, 10, all the way up to 45, because this code is ran all the way until index equals 10, and each time this for loop is ran, index is getting incremented by 1. And when index equals 10, that means index is no longer less than 10, and the for loop jumps down here to return 0, and you get process return 0. So just to kind of show you a little bit more about it, let me actually take out value. We're going to output index is what we'll do instead. And you can actually see what happens to index throughout the for loop. We're going to hit run. Let me get rid of this real quick because it was still open. We're going to hit run. And you can see what happens to index as it goes through the loop. It goes from 0 all the way up to 9, and then the loop ends. So I want you to practice with this for loop, see how you can do different counting exercises and kind of cycle through numbers with this for loop. And you know, even try changing this operator to index maybe greater than 10 and see how that changes it. You know, because obviously if we ran this right now, it wouldn't even run. It would just return because index starts at 0. So index is never actually greater than 10, so this code never runs. And also I want you to try, you know, obviously we declared index right here, but what if we just said index equals to 0 and we changed this value? We said index right here equals 0. Or we just said int index. Then we don't have to put int right here. We can just write index and we can actually declare it like that. So there's different ways you can kind of, I guess, declare this for loop. And I know right now just counting through these loops like we have been and adding numbers doesn't seem very practical. But I promise you by the end of this section, you will see very useful and practical examples of how we will use these for loops. So stay tuned for the next tutorial. Thank you.